The royal palace of Zafara was a place of perfection. Shining spires stretching toward the twin suns, walls carved from crystals that shimmered with every color of the spectrum. Everything in Zafara reflected their culture, elegant, precise, and unyielding. Yet for all its beauty, the palace had one flaw, one imperfection that no one could ignore. That flaw was Princess Lyria. Lyria had always been different from her royal peers. She had the sharp mind of a strategist and the curious heart of an explorer. But in a society that measured worth by one's ability to continue the royal bloodline, she was considered useless. For years, doctors and scientists had tried everything. Lyria had undergone every possible procedure, consumed rare elixirs, and endured countless tests, but still, she remained infertile. In the eyes of Zafara's royal council, that single failure defined her. On the morning of her 18th cycle, what humans would call her 18th birthday, the palace buzzed with unusual energy. The council had devised a plan that they believed would be amusing. "We cannot have her wasting resources on our planet," one minister whispered to another. "We shall give her to the human ambassador. Let him struggle with her. Perhaps he will find the burden amusing." Lyria, of course, had no idea. She had been summoned to the council chambers under the pretense of discussing diplomatic matters. She entered with her usual poise, her violet eyes scanning the room, calm and measured. "Princess Lyria," said the High Minister, his voice smooth but cold, "we have a special assignment for you." She raised a delicate brow. "An assignment?" Her tone was polite but carried a subtle edge. Lyria had learned early that words could be weapons. "Yes," said the minister. "You are to travel to the human planet, to live among them for a time." He paused, a sly smile playing at his lips. "With Ambassador Ethan." Lyria's eyes narrowed slightly. Ethan, she had heard of him. A human diplomat sent to negotiate. Minor trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Humans were weak, fragile, and highly unpredictable. Zafara considered them amusing, almost harmless. "Live with him?" Lyria asked, her voice even. "Yes. As our gift to him," the minister replied. "He will enjoy the experience. We have full confidence he will treat it as a light-hearted honor." Lyria's lips curved into a polite smile, but inside, a storm raged. She had endured humiliation all her life, but to be given away as a joke? This was beyond insult. Yet, she said nothing. In Zafara, silence was often sharper than words. She left the council chambers quietly, her mind already working through possibilities. She would play the part expected of her. But she would also watch, learn, and perhaps, just perhaps, find a way to turn this gift into something powerful. The journey to Earth was long. Sci-Fi spacecraft were marvels of engineering, silent gliding through the void with speeds no human engine could hope to match. Lyria watched the stars blur past, her thoughts weaving through memories of her childhood and the life she was leaving behind. Her homeworld was beautiful, but suffocating. She had never fit within its rigid walls, its endless rules. Perhaps, the humans, fragile and chaotic though they were, offered a strange kind of freedom. When the craft finally entered Earth's atmosphere, Lyria observed the blue and green planet with careful curiosity. Unlike Zafara, Earth seemed alive in an untamed, unpredictable way. The humans, she noted, were nothing like the alien scholars in general she had studied. They laughed loudly, they argued passionately, and they created strange, wondrous things, from simple materials. Even from orbit, she could see that humanity thrived on chaos. Yet somehow they survived. She landed near a city the humans called New York, stepping out into a world that smelled of rain, metal, and smoke. Humans bustled around her, and for the first time Lyria felt a faint thrill of something she had rarely experienced. Curiosity unbound by fear or expectation. The human ambassador, Ethan, was waiting. Tall, slightly disheveled, with a nervous smile. He extended his hand awkwardly. "Princess Lyria," he said. "Welcome to Earth." Lyria studied him carefully. Humans were soft, yes, but there was something in his eyes, a spark of courage or perhaps intelligence, that intrigued her. She shook his hand with polite formality. "Thank you, Ambassador Ethan," she said. "I look forward to our time together." Ethan's smile widened, though it faltered slightly. He had expected a fragile, spoiled alien princess, perhaps even a miniature scandal. Instead, he faced someone regal, observant, and composed beyond anything he had imagined. The first weeks were difficult for Lyria. Humans had strange habits, loud customs, and their technology was primitive in some ways, yet curiously adaptable. She marveled at how they used simple tools to accomplish complex tasks. Where Zafara relied on perfection and control, humans relied on ingenuity. And slowly, she began to learn. Ethan, for his part, was both flustered and fascinated. Lyria's intelligence and grace were undeniable, yet she carried an air of mystery that made him cautious. He wanted to please her, to show that humans were capable of more than she expected. Little did he know she was already observing, analyzing, and quietly planning her own experiments. In private moments, Lyria would sit in the small quarters Ethan provided, studying human biology, technology, and even their culture. She discovered something remarkable. Humans had resilience, creativity, and a certain warmth that Zafara lacked. They were flawed, chaotic, and emotional, but these flaws allowed them to adapt in ways Zafara could not imagine. At night, Lyria stared at Earth's twin moons, thinking of her homeworld. She felt no longing for the palace anymore, only determination. Zafara had tried to humiliate her, but they did not know her true strength. She was not just a princess. She was a thinker, a strategist, and perhaps, one day, a creator of life in ways they had declared impossible. The council on Zafara continued, their jokes. They sent messages of mockery reminding her of her supposed failure. Lyria read each one with a faint smile. Their words were empty. She had begun to realize that human ingenuity and her own intelligence could achieve what Zafara deemed impossible. By the end of her first month on Earth, Lyria had quietly begun experiments using a combination of human technology and alien science she had secretly carried with her. She made no promises to anyone, least of all herself, but a small seed of hope began to grow. Perhaps one day, she would return to Zafara not as a joke, but as something they could never have imagined. For now, though, she learned, observed, and adapted. Every human she met, every challenge she faced became part of a larger lesson. Humans were not weak. They survived against impossible odds. They created solutions where none seemed possible, and they loved deeply despite fear and uncertainty. The first few weeks on Earth had been a shock to Princess Lyria. The planet was loud, messy, and chaotic in ways Zafara could never be. Humans laughed when they should have been serious. They argued passionately over trivial things. Their machines broke down constantly, yet they still managed to achieve incredible feats. Lyria had to admit, humans were unpredictable, but they were also fascinating. Ethan, the human ambassador, was trying his best to help her adapt. He arranged for her to attend meetings, tours, and even cultural events. At first, Lyria moved through these experiences with polite detachment, noting how humans often relied on improvisation rather than perfect design. Unlike Zafara, which valued flawless execution, humans succeeded despite mistakes. That intrigued her. One evening, Ethan invited Lyria to a gathering at his residence. The room was small but cozy, filled with books, trinkets, and photographs of places Lyria had never seen. Humans seemed to treasure memories in a way Zafara never did. Every item had a story. Every story revealed resilience, love, or courage. "Do you like it here?" Ethan asked nervously, offering her a cup of a warm drink humans called tea. Lyria studied him carefully. His question seemed simple, but it carried meaning. He wanted her to feel welcome. Humans valued emotions in ways Zafara ignored. She nodded. "It is different," she said softly. "There is life here that I did not expect." Ethan smiled. "Different can be good." Lyria took a small sip of the tea and felt its warmth spread through her. Humans relied on small comforts. small connections. Yet somehow they endured more than Zifara ever had to. She realized that these weaknesses, as Zifara called them, were actually strengths. Humans adapted, evolved, and survived through creativity and emotional intelligence. Over the next few weeks, Lyria began learning more about human science and biology. She had carried Zifara data crystals with her, filled with advanced knowledge about life, genetics, and medicine. She began to compare them with human methods, noting how humans approached problems from angles that Zifara never considered. One night, she worked late in Ethan's small lab, analyzing samples and running experiments quietly. She discovered something that sparked a faint thrill. Humans might hold the key to overcoming what Zifara had deemed impossible for her: her infertility. Ethan, who occasionally peeked into the lab to offer assistance, did not understand everything Lyria was doing, but he was amazed by her focus and intellect. "You think you could actually do it?" he asked cautiously. Lyria glanced at him, her eyes glowing with determination. "It is possible," she said simply. "But I will need patience, observation, and collaboration." He nodded. "Then I will help you however I can." Days turned into weeks. Lyria immersed herself in human life, learning not only science, but also the subtleties of their culture. She noticed how humans formed bonds of trust, shared burdens, and celebrated small victories. They were messy, chaotic, emotional, but they were also creative, resourceful, and capable of incredible things when motivated. Lyria could see now why Zifara had underestimated humans. They were not perfect, but their imperfection allowed them to grow and innovate in ways Zifara's rigid perfection could not. She also began forming a subtle bond with Ethan. It was not love, not yet, but mutual respect. Ethan admired her intelligence, her grace, and her quiet strength. Lyria respected his courage, his empathy, and his determination to help her adapt. Together they became a team. One afternoon, Lyria visited a human hospital with Ethan to observe human medicine firsthand. She watched doctors treat patients with skill, improvisation, and care. Humans did not have Zifara's advanced technology, yet they saved lives daily. She was struck by their resilience. "They survive because they fight for each other," Lyria observed quietly to Ethan. He looked at her. "Yes. And they care more than you might think." She smiled faintly. In that moment, she realized something crucial. Humans could teach her more than Zifara ever had. They could teach her adaptability, patience, and empathy, qualities that might help her achieve what her homeworld had declared impossible. In her private quarters, Lyria continued experiments in secret. She combined human biology with Zifara's genetic knowledge, testing methods quietly, carefully. She noted the differences between the two species. Humans could adapt quickly, their bodies were resilient in unexpected ways, and their emotional states influenced physical responses. By the end of her first month, she had developed a preliminary method that might allow her to carry life. It required precision, understanding, and cooperation. Humans, with their creativity and adaptability, could assist in ways Zifara could not predict. Despite her optimism, Lyria remained cautious. She could not let Zifara know she was working toward what they had labeled impossible. Their messages of mockery continued to arrive, filled with taunts and subtle threats. But each message only strengthened her resolve. She would not fail. She would prove that life, creation, and strength were not determined by Zifara's rigid definitions. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed changes in her demeanor. Lyria moved with more confidence. Her eyes held a quiet determination, and she spoke often of possibilities humans had never considered. He began to understand that she was not just surviving Earth. She was thriving on it, learning, adapting, and growing stronger. One evening, Lyria took a walk in the human city. The streets were alive with people, lights, and sound. She observed children laughing, street performers creating music with simple instruments, and families sharing meals. Humanity was flawed, yes, but it was alive, vibrant, and full of potential. She felt a connection to it, a sense of purpose that Zifara had never given her. She thought of her future, Perhaps one day she would return to Zifara, not as a joke, not as a failed princess, but as someone who had mastered the impossible. Humans had taught her resilience, empathy, and creativity. With their help, she could achieve what her own species could not. Back in her quarters, Lyria continued refining her methods. She worked late into the night, analyzing data, observing patterns, and adjusting her experiments. Ethan often stayed to assist, offering insights, encouragement, and support. Together, they formed a quiet partnership, blending human ingenuity with alien precision. As weeks passed, Lyria's confidence grew. She began to dream not just of survival, but of transformation. The princess who had been given away as a joke began to imagine a future where she would return to Zifara stronger than ever, with proof that humans, and she herself, could achieve the impossible. For the first time in her life, Lyria felt hope. Not the fragile hope that Zifara allowed its royals, but a deep, determined hope rooted in knowledge, effort, and collaboration. She knew the path ahead would be difficult. She knew there would be failures, setbacks, and challenges. But for the first time, she believed in her ability to succeed. The human world, with all its imperfections, had shown her a truth Zifara could not comprehend. Strength was not measured by rigid rules or inherited titles. Strength came from creativity, resilience, and the courage to try what others considered impossible. And Lyria, once the infertile princess, had learned that sometimes the greatest power lay not in perfection, but in the ability to adapt, to learn and to thrive where others expected failure. The first stage of her journey on Earth was ending, but her real work had just begun. Somewhere within her a quiet fire burned, a determination to prove that the Princess Zifara had mocked could in fact achieve the impossible. The alien world might have laughed, but Earth had taught her a lesson that Zifara would never forget. The months passed quickly on Earth, and Princess Lyria grew stronger, wiser, and more determined. Life among humans had changed her in ways she never expected. No longer simply surviving, she was thriving. She had learned the humans' ways, their ingenuity, their compassion, and their persistence. And in that learning, she had discovered something extraordinary: possibility. It began quietly, in the small lab that Ethan had prepared for her. Night after night, she worked meticulously, combining human biology with her Zifara knowledge. She had created a series of experimental protocols, each designed to test the limits of her body and its potential for life. She knew Zifara would call her foolish or worse, deluded, but she no longer cared about their judgments. Ethan watched her with a mix of awe and concern. "Are you sure this is safe?" he asked one evening, as Lyria adjusted tiny molecular instruments on a sample. She looked at him, her violet eyes steady and calm. "I have calculated the risks," she said. "There is always risk in creation, but failure is part of learning." He nodded slowly. Ethan had learned that arguing with Lyria was useless. She had a resolve that humans rarely encountered, a combination of intelligence, patience, and quiet confidence. Yet he admired her for it. Lyria's experiments were not simple. She needed to synchronize alien genetic patterns with human adaptability, a task that required careful monitoring and adjustments. Many times, her initial tests failed, producing no results or flawed outcomes. But she did not despair. Each failure taught her something new. She noted subtle differences, adjusted chemical balances, and refined her approach. Her understanding of human emotions also played a part. She realized that stress, hope, and determination could affect biological processes. Unlike Zifara, humans responded to emotional stimuli in ways that could influence their bodies. By observing Ethan, his colleagues, and even ordinary people, she learned how to create an environment conducive to life, not just scientifically but emotionally. Finally, after weeks of careful work, Lyria noticed a change. A single test sample, an early attempt to stimulate her reproductive system using a combination of human and alien techniques, showed signs of viability. The cells were dividing, healthy and strong. Lyria felt a thrill she had never experienced before. It was not only a success, It was proof that she could challenge Zafara's rigid definitions of possibility. Ethan came into the lab just as she analyzed the results. His eyes widened when he saw the data. Lyria, this is incredible, he stammered. It actually worked. She allowed herself a small smile. This is only the beginning, she said softly. We must continue, carefully and patiently. Days turned into weeks as she refined her techniques. Each successful experiment strengthened her confidence, and each failure only sharpened her understanding. Lyria had discovered something remarkable. Humans and Zafara were not enemies, not opposites. Together they could achieve something neither species could do alone. Outside the lab, Lyria began to embrace more of human life. She walked in the parks, observed families, and interacted with children. She was fascinated by their resilience, their curiosity, and their ability to adapt quickly. They were chaotic, yes, but their chaos was a source of creativity and growth. One evening, Ethan asked her about her thoughts on returning to Zafara. Do you think you will go back? He asked, concerned. Lyria paused, looking out at the glowing city lights. I will return, she said quietly, but not as they expect. I will return as someone stronger, wiser, and capable of life in ways they said I could not achieve. He nodded, realizing that she was no longer the princess who had arrived. Months ago, Earth had changed her, humans had changed her, and she was ready to face Zafara on her own terms. Then came the moment she had been waiting for, the first true success. One morning, as she analyzed the latest test, she saw the unmistakable signs of development, life beginning to take hold where none was supposed to exist. Lyria's heart raced. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment she had quietly dreamed about in the long nights on Earth. She shared the news with Ethan, who could hardly contain his excitement. This is history, he whispered. You've done something no one thought possible. Lyria nodded, her expression calm but proud. History is made by those who dare to try, she said, and I am no longer afraid to try. Word of her work began to spread quietly among a small circle of human scientists. They marveled at her methods, her intelligence, and her determination. Lyria learned to trust them, and they began to assist her carefully, respecting her knowledge, while contributing their own insights. It was a collaboration like no other, combining alien precision with human creativity. As the experiments progressed, Lyria noticed changes within herself. Her body responded positively, adapting in ways she had not anticipated. She realized that the combination of human ingenuity, emotional support, and alien biology was creating a synergy, a new form of life, a new possibility. One night, she stood on the balcony of Ethan's residence looking at the stars. She thought of Zafara, of the council that had mocked her, of the ministers who had called her useless. She smiled faintly. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated humans. And soon she would show them the truth. The months of work began to yield undeniable results. Lyria could feel the life growing within her body, a miracle that Zafara had declared impossible. The princess who had been a joke, the infertile princess, was now on the brink of proving her worth in the most profound way imaginable. Ethan remained by her side, supporting her in every way he could. He marveled at her strength, at her grace, and at the determination that had carried her through failure after failure. Together, they had created something extraordinary, life born from collaboration, ingenuity, and hope. But Zafara was far away, unaware of the transformation taking place. The council continued their taunts, believing that the princess would fail and return humiliated. They did not know that she had grown beyond their expectations, that she had discovered a strength they could never understand. Lyria began to plan her eventual return. She knew that when she went back, she would not only challenge their assumptions, she would shatter them. She would return not as a joke, not as a failed princess, but as a symbol of what could be achieved when intelligence, determination, and cooperation overcame prejudice and rigid thinking. One evening, as she rested after another long day of experiments, she felt the unmistakable stir of life within her. It was subtle at first, a gentle movement, almost imperceptible. But it was there. Lyria's heart swelled with emotion. She had done it. Against all odds, she had overcome the limitations Zephyra had imposed on her. Tears, unbidden, filled her eyes. She had never expected to feel so deeply. This was not just a personal triumph, it was a testament to humans, to collaboration, and to the power of hope. She had taken what others called weakness and transformed it into strength. She had taken what they called impossibility and made it real. Ethan, sensing her emotions, placed a hand gently on hers. "You've done it," he said softly. "Yes," Lyria whispered. "And soon, the world will see what we have done." The weeks that followed were filled with careful observation and continued growth. Lyria's body adapted to the changes. Her experiments refined to perfection. She was learning, evolving, and preparing for the moment when she would return to Zephyra. The princess who had been given as a joke was no longer the same. She was stronger, wiser, and more capable than anyone could have imagined. And when she returned to her homeworld, she would do so not as a burden, but as a mother. The mother of life Zephyra had once thought impossible. In the quiet moments before dawn, Lyria stood on the balcony again, looking at the stars. She whispered, a promise to herself. One day she would show Zephyra that true strength was not inherited, not dictated, but earned through perseverance, courage, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. The spacecraft descended slowly through the violet skies of Zephyra. Princess Lyria sat quietly in the cabin, her hands resting on her growing abdomen, the evidence of months of careful work and human collaboration. She was no longer the fragile princess they had mocked. She was strong, confident, and carrying life, a life that Zephyra had once deemed impossible. The palace loomed ahead, its crystal spires glinting in the sunlight. It looked the same as she remembered, yet now it felt smaller, rigid, and narrow-minded, compared to the vast, unpredictable world she had come from. Lyria's heart beat steadily. She was prepared, not for battle, not for diplomacy, but to challenge the arrogance of a society that had tried to define her worth by a single limitation. When the spacecraft landed, a small crowd of palace attendants and advisors waited. The council had been informed of her arrival, expecting humiliation, weakness, perhaps tears. What they saw instead was a calm, radiant princess. Her hair flowed smoothly, her eyes shone with intelligence and purpose, and her posture carried quiet authority. "Princess Lyria," the High Minister said, stepping forward with a polite, if slightly nervous bow. "Welcome back." Lyria inclined her head gracefully. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was soft, but firm, carrying a strength that immediately drew attention. "I have returned." The council exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected a timid figure, someone fragile and submissive. Instead, Lyria seemed untouchable. "I see," said another minister cautiously. "You survived your time among humans?" "Yes," Lyria replied, her violet eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "And I have learned much. More than I could have learned here, under your rules and restrictions." The words stung. The ministers shifted, uncomfortable with her quiet confidence. Lyria allowed herself a faint smile. She had come not just to return, but to teach, to show, to prove. She stepped forward, addressing the entire council. "You once mocked me for what you called my failure. You believed that I could not carry life. You believed that I was less than worthy because of what you could not see." Her voice grew firmer, echoing through the crystal halls. "And yet, here I am. I bring life where you said there could be none. I bring proof that intelligence, perseverance, and collaboration can achieve what rigid thinking cannot." The council members recoiled slightly. shocked by her words. Whispers filled the chamber. Some were skeptical, others fearful, but all were aware that the princess was no longer the powerless figure they had dismissed. Lyria moved closer to the High Minister. "I have returned not as a joke," she said, her tone calm but commanding. "I have returned as a mother-to-be, and I bring with me something that humans and I have created together, a life that combines strength, adaptability, and intelligence in ways Zifara cannot imagine." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Some ministers covered their mouths, unable to comprehend what she said. Others exchanged worried glances. A few, those who were younger and less rigid in thinking, looked on. With awe, the High Minister stepped forward, attempting to maintain authority. This is impossible," he said. "The princess, you cannot carry life. It defies every law of biology and science we know." Lyria shook her head gently. "The laws you know are not absolute. They are limited by fear, by arrogance, by unwillingness to explore beyond rigid definitions. I have learned from humans, creatures you deem weak, imperfect, and fragile. And together, we have achieved the impossible." Silence followed. Even the guards and attendants who had gathered to witness her return felt the weight of her words. The princess, once dismissed as a joke, now carried the authority of someone who had proven the world wrong. One young advisor, unable to contain his curiosity, stepped forward. "Princess, can you show us? Can we see proof?" Lyria nodded. Slowly, she revealed her growing abdomen, gently placing her hands on it. The chamber gasped. The proof was undeniable. She was carrying life. She was creating life. She had done what Zifara had said was impossible. The High Minister's face went pale. He had expected failure, humiliation, weakness. But this was not weakness. This was triumph. And it challenged everything he believed about power, hierarchy, and the value of life. Lyria continued, her voice steady and unwavering. "I have learned that strength is not only in perfection, nor only in intelligence. Strength is in perseverance, in adaptability, in courage, and in collaboration. Humans have shown me that even those considered weak can achieve greatness. And now I bring that lesson back to Zifara." Whispers spread through the council chambers. Some ministers were angry, their pride wounded. Others were amazed, recognizing that Lyria had achieved something truly remarkable. The princess who had been laughed at had returned as a symbol of possibility. Ethan Kama, who had accompanied her secretly, stood just outside the chamber, watching with quiet pride. He had witnessed her transformation firsthand and knew the truth. This princess had been underestimated not because she was weak, but because others could not imagine what a determined human-alien collaboration could achieve. Lyria addressed the council once more. "I have come to ask you to reconsider your definitions of worth. You measure value by inheritance, by rigid rules, by fear of imperfection. I ask you to see differently. Life, strength, and intelligence are not so easily contained. They are nurtured through effort, compassion, and the courage to explore beyond the known." The High Minister struggled to respond. "Princess, your achievements, they are extraordinary," he said haltingly. "But how can this be? How can humans and you create life together?" Lyria smiled faintly. "Through cooperation, understanding, and respect. Through seeing the potential in what you dismiss as weak. And through refusing to accept your limitations as absolute." The chamber remained silent. Lyria could feel the tension, the disbelief, the fear. But she also sensed something new: admiration, curiosity, and perhaps even hope. The rigid society of Zifara was confronted with a truth it had never imagined, that life, strength, and intelligence could come from unexpected sources. She took a deep breath. "I will not allow my people to be defined by fear or arrogance. I have returned to show that change is possible, that cooperation between species, between minds, can achieve what isolation and pride cannot. And I have returned as a mother-to-be to demonstrate the proof of this truth." The council members stared, unsure how to respond. The princess they had mocked had returned with undeniable evidence that they were wrong. Their world had been shaken, their assumptions challenged and their arrogance exposed. Lyria turned slightly, gazing toward the palace windows where the twin suns reflected off the crystal walls. "I bring life," she said softly, "and with it, the possibility of a future, where Zifara can learn, grow, and embrace what is possible beyond fear." A few ministers, younger and less bound by tradition, stepped forward. "Princess, and we see now that perhaps we have been wrong," one said quietly. "Your courage, your work, it is extraordinary." Lyria nodded. She did not need applause, nor validation. Her proof was in the life she carried, in the transformation she had achieved, and in the lesson she had brought to her homeworld. The High Minister finally spoke, his voice strained with disbelief and reluctant respect. "Princess Lyria, you have done what none of us could have imagined. We acknowledge your achievement." Lyria's smile was gentle but triumphant. "Thank you. But acknowledgement is not enough. I ask you to learn, to adapt, and to see the value and strength that comes from collaboration, empathy, and perseverance. The world is larger than Zifara, life is stronger than fear, and humans, though imperfect, can teach us much." The council remained silent, some in awe, others in discomfort. Yet Lyria knew she had made her point. She had returned not as a joke, not as a failure, but as a symbol of what could be achieved when courage, intelligence, and determination overcame rigid thinking. In that moment, Lyria felt a quiet sense of triumph. She had not only defied the expectations of Zifara, but had shown the true potential of life itself. And as she placed a hand on her abdomen, feeling the life growing within, she knew that the future was no longer defined by fear, mockery, or limits. It was defined by possibility, and she had created it. The princess who had been given away as a joke had returned as a mother-to-be, carrying not just life, but hope, strength, and a lesson that Zifara would never forget. The palace of Zifara was quiet that morning. Its usual brilliance glimmered under the twin suns, but something felt different. Princess Lyria, now a mother-to-be carrying life no one had thought possible, walked through the halls with calm authority. Courtiers, guards, and ministers all paused as she passed, aware that history was unfolding before their eyes. Lyria had returned from Earth with knowledge, determination, and an unwavering sense of purpose. She had proven her strength, defied expectations, and shown that life, courage, and intelligence could flourish where others had claimed it could not. And now, the moment that she had worked toward in secret, through months of collaboration, experimentation, and patient effort, was approaching. The birth of her child. Ethan had remained by her side, a quiet presence of support and understanding. Humans had a saying about partnership, and Lyria now understood it fully. He had helped her, advised her, and encouraged her, yet he also respected her intelligence and autonomy. Their bond had grown silently, built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. The birthing chamber was prepared with care. Lyria's life and the life within her were precious, delicate, and remarkable. She moved slowly, her hands brushing the walls of the chamber, feeling the energy of the palace and the anticipation of those who had once doubted her. Zifara's finest scientists, who had arrived to witness this miracle, stood respectfully at a distance. Even they were awed by the calm strength that radiated from the princess. "This is truly unprecedented," one whispered quietly to another. Lyria smiled faintly, her eyes closed for a moment. Yes, she thought, unprecedented and inevitable. Hours passed. Lyria's training, patience, and understanding of human and alien biology guided her through the process. She did not panic, did not falter. She breathed steadily, trusting her instincts, her preparation, and the support around her. The room was silent, except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the soft murmurs of the attendants. Finally, after long hours, the moment arrived. Lyria felt a deep, radiant movement within her. The life she had nurtured was ready. With careful effort, guided by her knowledge and strength, she brought forth a child. A new life. A hybrid of human adaptability. And Zephyra intelligence breathed for the first time. The chamber gasped collectively. It was a perfect, healthy child, small yet strong, its tiny body glowing faintly in the crystalline light of the palace. Lyria held the child close, her heart swelling with emotion that words could not capture. For the first time in Zephyra, the impossible had become reality. Ethan stepped forward, eyes shining with pride and awe. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Yes," Lyria replied softly, holding her child. "It is life, and it is proof that determination, collaboration, and courage can overcome even the strictest limits." The High Minister and council members, who had once mocked her, now stood in stunned silence. Some bowed their heads, recognizing the truth they could no longer deny. Others whispered among themselves, uncertain how to respond. The princess, who had been dismissed, humiliated, and given away as a joke, had returned with undeniable proof of strength, creativity, and resilience. Lyria looked around the chamber, her voice calm but strong. "Let this child serve as a symbol, not of power by inheritance, nor of rigid rules, nor of fear, but of possibility. Humans have taught me that even those deemed weak can achieve greatness. Let us embrace that lesson, rather than cling to arrogance." The council remained quiet. For once there was no mockery, no scorn, only recognition, some grudging, some genuine, of a truth they had been blind to. Word of Lyria's achievement spread quickly throughout Zephyra. Citizens gathered in curiosity and amazement, watching the princess who had been a failure transform into a mother of life. The story of her time on Earth, her experiments, and her determination inspired awe and respect. People began to question their own assumptions, to see the potential in collaboration, creativity, and perseverance. Lyria did not stop there. She began sharing her knowledge, carefully and wisely, with those willing to learn. She taught the council, the scientists, and eventually the citizens about the lessons she had learned from humans, the importance of adaptability, empathy, and courage in the face of uncertainty. Slowly, Zephyra began to change. Even the High Minister, who had once ridiculed her, could not deny the truth. "Princess, you have changed everything," he said quietly. "Not just for yourself, but for all of us." Lyria nodded, holding her child close. "Change is inevitable when we embrace possibility rather than fear," she said. "Let this child remind us of what we can achieve together, humans and Zephyra alike." Ethan stayed at her side, his presence a reminder of the bond between species, cultures, and minds. Lyria had learned much from him: patience, creativity, emotional insight, and the quiet courage to try where others feared failure. Humans had shown her that life was not defined by rigid rules, but by resilience, collaboration, and determination. The child, small and perfect, looked up at her with bright, curious eyes. Lyria felt a surge of hope and responsibility. This child represented more than herself. It represented the future of Zephyra and Earth working together, the possibility of life and intelligence thriving beyond the limits of one species. Weeks passed, and Lyria adapted to motherhood. She taught her child what she had learned, instilling values of courage, curiosity, and empathy. Citizens visited to see the princess and her child, and slowly, admiration replaced doubt. Zephyra began to embrace new ideas, respecting human ingenuity and the lessons Lyria had brought. The princess, who had once been a joke, had become a teacher, a mother, and a symbol. She had transformed not just her own life, but the hearts and minds of an entire planet. Ethan, standing quietly nearby, spoke softly to her one evening. "You've changed everything," he said. "You've shown them the truth about life, about strength, about humans, and about yourself." Lyria smiled, watching her child sleep peacefully in her arms. Yes, she said softly. And they have learned that strength is not in perfection, not in arrogance, but in courage, determination, and collaboration. Humans may be imperfect, chaotic, and emotional, but they are capable of greatness. And so am I. The palace, once a place of rigid rules and narrow thinking, began to evolve. Ministers, scientists, and citizens began to embrace innovation, creativity, and cooperation with humans. They saw that strength and value were not limited to those born into power or perfection. They were nurtured through effort, courage, and the willingness to explore the unknown. Lyria, now a mother, a scholar, and a leader, looked toward the twin suns rising over Zifra. She felt pride, hope, and a quiet joy. She had proven that life could flourish where others had predicted failure. She had proven that humans, though imperfect, were extraordinary. And she had proven that she, once dismissed as weak, could achieve greatness against all odds. Her child stirred in her arms and she whispered softly, "This is only the beginning. Together we will grow, learn, and thrive. Zifra and Earth, humans and aliens, we can achieve more than anyone has imagined." And, as the twin suns bathed the palace in golden light, Princess Lyria, once given away as a joke, knew that she had created a legacy. One that would endure for generations. A legacy of hope, strength, intelligence, and the triumph of life against impossible odds. The princess who had been mocked, humiliated, and dismissed had returned as a mother. And with her child, she carried a future where humans and aliens could thrive together, proving that even the smallest spark of courage and collaboration could ignite a brilliance no one could contain. Zifra would never forget. And neither would the humans who had helped her, or the life she now held in her arms. The living proof that the impossible was possible. The princess smiled, holding her child close, knowing that she had fulfilled not only her own destiny, but a destiny that would inspire two worlds for generations to come.